The silence that fell over Ethelgard's wasn't one of reverence. It was the silence of prey when a predator enters its territory. Every clink of polished silver, every hushed whisper ceased. All eyes turned to the man who had just entered, a man whose net worth could purchase every soul in the room 1,000 times over. Landon Carter moved not like a guest, but like a king inspecting a newly conquered castle. But in this opulent kingdom of crystal and cream, one person saw him not as a king, but as a ghost from a past he had ruthlessly buried, and she, a waitress named Summer, was about to become the kingdom's ghost hunter. Ethelgard's was less a restaurant and more a sanctuary for the gods of finance and industry. Tucked away on a quiet, cobblestoned street in a city that bowed to money, its entrance was marked only by a single polished brass A. To dine there was to announce you had not just arrived, but that you had conquered. The air inside was thick with the scent of old leather truffles, and an unspoken agreement the rules of the outside world did not apply within these hallowed, soundproofed walls. Summer Duffy knew this agreement well. She lived by it, breathed it, and was suffocated by it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. For her, Ethelgard's wasn't a sanctuary. It was a gilded cage where she performed a meticulous ballet of service in exchange for the exorbitant tips that were paying for her younger brother's 3rd round of experimental treatment. Every smile she offered, every crumb she swept from a linen tablecloth with her silver tool, was a coin in the jar for his future. She was good at her job. More than good, she was invisible. She anticipated needs before they were voiced, refilled water glasses with the silence of a passing shadow, and memorized the labyrinthine dietary restrictions and petty preferences of a clientele who believed their whims were celestial commands. She had learned to compartmentalize to separate Summer, the worried sister, and struggling law student, from Summer the waitress, a ghost in a crisp black uniform. But that mechanism of survival shattered the moment Landon Carter walked in. He didn't arrive with a thunderous announcement. He simply appeared flanked by 2 younger men in identical, ruthlessly tailored suits who looked more like well-dressed Dobermans than associates. Carter himself was a study in understated power. His suit was a quiet charcoal grey that probably cost more than Summer's car. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his eyes, a piercing, pale blue, swept the room with an unnerving mixture of boredom and appraisal. He wasn't looking at people. He was assessing assets and finding them wanting. The restaurant's manager, Mr. Dubois, a man who normally glided with the unshakable confidence of a ship's captain, scurried towards Carter like a nervous cabin boy. "Mr. Carter, a distinct pleasure. Your usual table is ready, of course?" Dubois murmured, his voice a low, reverent hum. Carter didn't acknowledge him. His gaze had landed on a table by the large bay window, a prime spot currently occupied by a couple celebrating what looked like an anniversary, judging by the small wrapped gift box between them. "I want that one," Carter stated. It wasn't a request. It was a correction of a cosmic error. Dubois' smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "So that table is occupied. The Pattersons have had it reserved for weeks, but yours is in the alcove, much more private." Carter's eyes finally flicked to Dubois, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Are you telling me no?" The question was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the chilling promise of consequences. Summer watched from her station, her tray held tight against her waist. She had seen this before. It was a power play, a casual demonstration of his place in the universe. The Pattersons, a sweet older couple who came in twice a year, were about to become collateral damage in Landon Carter's unceasing war, to prove he owned the world. She saw Dubois approach the Pattersons, his posture apologetic. There were hushed words, confused expressions, then resignation. A bottle of the finest champagne was sent to their new, less desirable table in the corner, a gilded apology for being in the way of a titan. The Pattersons accepted it, with tight, forced smiles, their special evening irrevocably tarnished. Carter settled into his newly acquired throne, not even glancing at the displaced couple. He tossed the menu onto the table without opening it. The sea bass, pan-seared, not grilled. And tell the chef if the skin isn't crispy, he'll be filleting fish in a dockside shack by morning. A bottle of the 96 Montrachet, and be quick about it. It was Summer's section. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to trade tables with another server, to feign illness, to simply walk away. Serving a regular rude customer was one thing. They were background noise, a part of the job's unpleasant texture. But serving Landon Carter felt different. It felt like serving a verdict. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she smoothed her apron and approached the table. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice a carefully constructed melody of professional warmth. "An excellent choice. I'll have that wine brought over immediately." He didn't look at her. He was scrolling through something on his phone, his thumb moving with dismissive flicks. One of his associates, a young man with a hungry, predatory look, spoke for him. "Make sure it's decanted. For 10 minutes. Not a 9, not 11. 10. "Of course, sir." Summer replied, her eyes remaining on the billionaire. It was then, as she turned to leave, that his voice, dry as old paper, stopped her. "Waitress." She turned back. "Yes, Mr. Carter." He finally lifted his head, and his pale blue eyes raked over her, a quick, dehumanizing scan that made her feel like a piece of furniture. A faint glimmer of something, not recognition, but a flicker of analytical thought, crossed his face before it vanished. "There's a scuff mark on your left shoe," he said, his voice flat. "This is Ethelgard's, not a diner. Have some self-respect." He looked back down at his phone, the execution complete. His associates smirked. The silence at the table was absolute. Summer felt a hot flush of shame and anger crawl up her neck. She instinctively looked down. On the toe of her practical, comfortable, and meticulously polished black shoe, there was indeed a tiny, faint grey mark, probably from bumping against a table leg. It was nothing. It was everything. He hadn't just insulted her. He had reminded her of her station. He had, with a few careless words, reduced her to a flawed object in his perfect world. She was the scuff mark on the shoe. "My apologies, sir. I will attend to it," she managed to say, her voice miraculously even. As she walked away, her fists clenched so tightly, her fingernails dug into her palms, she could feel the sympathetic, pitying eyes of other diners on her back. They had all witnessed the casual cruelty, the flick of the wrist that could crush a person's dignity. And no one, not a single soul in that room of powerful people, dared to say a word. They were all part of the gilded cage, terrified of rattling the bars and waking the beast. But as Summer stood in the alcove polishing a meaningless mark from her shoe, something inside her began to shift. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a different feeling was hardening, a cold, sharp, and dangerous resolve. The name Landon Carter wasn't just a name to Summer. It was a wound. It was a story she had chased 2 years ago, back when she was still a wide-eyed journalism student with a fire in her belly and a naive belief that a well-written article could change the world. The memory surged as she decanted the obscenely expensive wine, her hands moving with an autopilot precision she was grateful for. Her mind wasn't in the hushed, opulent dining room of Ethelgard's. It was in a cluttered, dusty workshop, filled with the smell of ozone and soldering flux. It was the workshop of Dr. Owen Schmidt. Dr. Schmidt was a brilliant, eccentric biomedical engineer, a friend of her late father's from university. He was the kind of man who forgot to eat because he was on the verge of a breakthrough, whose glasses were perpetually smudged, and whose passion for his work was as infectious as a common cold. Summer had been assigned a puff piece for her university paper, Local Genius on the Cusp of Medical Revolution. His company, a small, fiercely independent startup called Innovatech Diagnostics, was his life's work. He had developed a revolutionary, non-invasive diagnostic tool. It used a proprietary light-wave technology to detect specific protein markers for early-stage pancreatic cancer, a notoriously silent killer. His prototype was clunky, a mess of wires and salvaged parts. But it worked. The preliminary data was astounding. It had the potential to save hundreds of thousands of lives. Summer remembered the excitement in his voice, the way his hands flew as he explained the complex science in simple, beautiful terms. "Imagine, Summer," he had said, his eyes gleaming behind his thick lenses, "a world where a death sentence becomes a treatable condition, all because we can catch it in time." He had poured his life savings, his pension, everything he had into Innovatech. He was on the verge of securing his final round of funding to begin clinical trials. He was so close, and then Landon Carter had come into the picture. Carter's massive conglomerate, Carter Global Acquisitions, specialized in what he euphemistically called market consolidation. In reality, he was a corporate shark who smelled blood in the water. Carter didn't want to partner with Innovatech. He didn't want to invest. He wanted to own it. All of it. For a fraction of its potential worth. Dr. Schmidt, a man of principle who wanted his technology to be affordable and accessible, refused Carter's lowball offer. He believed in his mission. He told Summer he wouldn't let his life's work become just another overpriced asset in a billionaire's portfolio, milked for maximum profit at the expense of patients. That was when the war began. Carter Global launched a hostile takeover bid. When that failed, they used their immense legal power to bury Innovatech in patent litigation. They claimed Dr. Schmidt's proprietary technology infringed on a dozen obscure patents Carter's company had recently acquired from defunct tech firms for pennies on the dollar. It was a lie, a fabrication, woven by an army of lawyers who billed more in an hour than Dr. Schmidt made in a month. Summer had tried to cover the story. She'd spent weeks interviewing legal experts off the record, trying to untangle the web of corporate subterfuge. She saw the pattern clearly. Carter would isolate a smaller innovative company, bleed it dry with legal fees it couldn't possibly afford, and then swoop in to buy the remaining assets and the all-important patents from the bankrupt husk for next to nothing. But no one wanted to listen. Her university paper was too small. The local news outlets were too afraid of Carter's advertising dollars and his army of libel lawyers. The story was a whisper against a hurricane. The legal battle dragged on for a year. It drained Innovatech of every last penny. Dr. Schmidt was forced to lay off his small team. He sold his house to pay his legal bills. He fought until he had nothing left. The stress took a visible toll. The brilliant, energetic man Summer had interviewed was replaced by a hollowed-out shell, his eyes filled with a permanent, haunted look of defeat. The last time Summer saw him, he was packing the last of his equipment into cardboard boxes. Carter Global had won. They had acquired Innovatech's patents in the bankruptcy auction for a sum that was an insult to the word. "He didn't just take my company, Summer," Dr. Schmidt had told her, his voice raspy. "He took the years. He took the lives that Tool could have saved. It's all just sitting in a file cabinet now in some legal department, a dormant patent. It's worthless to him. It was just about winning." 6 months later, Dr. Owen Schmidt died of a massive heart attack. He was 58 years old. The doctor said it was stress. Summer knew it was Landon Carter, and now here he was. The architect of that destruction, the man who had crushed a gentle genius and potentially erased countless futures, was sitting 20 feet away, complaining that his wine wasn't breathing correctly. The bottle in her hands suddenly felt immensely heavy. The 96 Montrachet. Its price could have funded Dr. Schmidt's legal defense for a month. The carefully constructed walls of her compartmentalization crumbled into dust. This wasn't just a rude customer anymore. This was the man who had killed her father's friend. This was the man who embodied the soulless, predatory greed she was studying law to fight against. He was a ghost at the feast, and only she could see the blood on his hands. Her movements became sharper, more deliberate. She finished decanting the wine, her mind racing. The shame from his comment about her shoe had burned away, replaced by a glacial rage. He didn't remember her. Of course he didn't. To him she was a waitress with a scuffed shoe. Dr. Schmidt was just another failed acquisition, a footnote in a quarterly report. The lives he impacted were less than gnats to him. She placed the decanter and a single perfect crystal glass on a silver tray. As she approached the table, she saw him differently. Not as an intimidating titan of industry, but as a hollow man, a bully who used his wealth as a shield and a weapon. He was powerful, yes, but his power was built on the wreckage of people like Owen Schmidt. She placed the glass before him with a steady hand. She poured the wine, the pale gold liquid catching the light. "Your 96 Montrachet, sir," she said, her voice perfectly level, devoid of the earlier feigned warmth. "Decanted for exactly 10 minutes. He grunted, not looking up from his phone. As she stood there waiting for him to dismiss her, an idea, wild and terrifying, began to sprout in the barren ground of her anger. It was a seed of defiance. What if his anonymity was his shield? What if the one thing a man like Landon Carter couldn't stand was being seen, truly seen for what he was, by the people he considered beneath his notice? It was a reckless thought, a career-ending, life-altering thought. It could cost her the job she desperately needed. But as she looked at his indifferent, impassive face, she thought of Dr. Schmidt's empty workshop and the haunted look in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, the risk felt less significant than the reason. The next few weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Landon Carter became a regular fixture at Ethelgard's holding court, at his Concord window table 2 or 3 times a week. Each visit was a new performance, a fresh opportunity for him to demonstrate his casual disdain for the world and everyone in it. And each time Summer found herself in his section, a twist of fate orchestrated by Mr. Dubois, who believed her unflappable professionalism was the best defense against Carter's volatile moods. Dubois saw her composure as a shield for the restaurant. Summer saw it as a prison. She endured a litany of petty cruelties. He would send back perfectly cooked steaks, claiming they were a degree off his preferred temperature. He would quiz her on the obscure provincial origins of a cheese, smirking when she hesitated for a moment. He would conduct loud, aggressive business calls, forcing the entire dining room to listen to him eviscerate some unfortunate subordinate over a deal. But his most venomous attacks were reserved for the staff. He seemed to take a perverse pleasure in finding a person's smallest insecurity and magnifying it under the full glare of the public spotlight. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. The restaurant was buzzing, filled with the low hum of expensive conversations. A new waiter, a young man named Leo, was on his first week of service. He was barely 20, with wide, nervous eyes, and an eagerness to please that was almost painful to watch. He had been assigned the table next to Carter's. Leo was carrying a heavy tray laden with entrees for a party of 6 when he made a fatal error. To navigate a narrow gap, he had to pass close to the back of Carter's chair. As he did, Carter, without looking, shifted his weight and pushed his chair back a few inches. The corner of the chair caught the edge of Leo's tray. The crash was catastrophic. Porcelain shattered, sending shards skittering across the marble floor. A rich Bordelaise sauce splattered across the back of a woman's cream-colored Chanel jacket at the next table. The entire restaurant fell silent, every head snapping towards the source of the commotion. Leo stood frozen, his face ashen, his eyes wide with horror. He was surrounded by the wreckage of $1,000 worth of food and an incalculable amount of damage to his nascent career. I'm so sorry, sir. He stammered, looking at Carter. Landon Carter slowly turned in his chair. He looked down at the mess on the floor, then at the trembling young man. A slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were surgically precise. "Look at this," he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. He gestured to Leo as if he were a particularly disgusting piece of garbage. "Incompetence on legs. What is your name?" "Leo, sir," the boy whispered. "Leo," Carter repeated, savoring the name. "Leo, do you have any concept of the cost of what you've just destroyed? Not just the food, but the disruption. The dry cleaning bill for this lady's jacket. The ambiance." He let the words hang in the air. Some people are simply not cut out for this world. They lack the basic motor skills, the spatial awareness to exist without causing damage. You, Leo, are one of those people. Tears welled in Leo's eyes. He stood mortified, unable to move or speak, as dozens of pairs of eyes bored into him. Mr. Dubois was rushing over his face, a mask of frantic apology, but Carter held up a hand to stop him. He wasn't finished. "Tell me, Leo." Carter continued, his voice dripping with condescending curiosity. "What was your grand ambition in life that led you here to dropping plates at my feet?" That was it. That was the moment something in Summer snapped. The carefully constructed dam of her professionalism, her need for this job, her fear, it all broke. She saw Dr. Schmidt's face superimposed over Leo's. She saw the same casual, soul-crushing cruelty that had driven a good man to his grave being used to publicly crucify a terrified boy. Before she even realized what she was doing, she was moving. She stepped forward, placing herself between Carter and the still-frozen Leo. She held a clean linen napkin in her hand. "Sir, accidents happen," she said, her voice low but clear, cutting through the thick tension. "Allow us to clean this up. Leo, go to the back. I'll handle this." She didn't look at Leo, but she felt his hesitant retreat. Her eyes were locked on Landon Carter. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him as a waitress to a customer, but as an equal. And he felt it. His smile vanished. His pale blue eyes narrowed. "And who are you?" "The boys' union representative." "I'm the staff member who is handling this situation," Summer replied, her voice unwavering. She knelt, using the napkin to gingerly pick up the largest piece of shattered plate. She was buying time, trying to de-escalate, trying to get Leo out of the line of fire. Carter leaned forward. "I was speaking to him. Not to you. I believe I was teaching him a valuable lesson about consequences." "With all due respect, sir," Summer said, rising to her feet. "This is a restaurant, not your boardroom, and our staff are people, not teachable moments for your amusement." A collective gasp, soft but audible, rippled through the dining room. No one spoke to Landon Carter like that. No one. Mr. Dubois looked as if he might faint. He scurried to Summer's side, grabbing her arm. "Miss Duffy, that is quite enough, Mr. Carter. I am so deeply sorry for her insubordination." Carter waved him into silence, his gaze still fixed on Summer. It was a look of pure, venomous fury. But there was something else in it, too, a flicker of surprise. He was a predator who had just been bitten by his prey. "You have a name," he said. It wasn't a question. "Summer," she replied, her chin held high. "Summer." He repeated the same way he had said Leo's name, but this time it wasn't dismissive. It was a threat. He filed it away. You have a misplaced sense of courage. It won't serve you well." He then turned to Dubois, his voice dropping back to its imperious calm. "I want her fired, and I want the boy fired. I don't dine in establishments that employ the clumsy and the insubordinate. Have their final paychecks ready. I will be deducting the cost of the damages and the lady's jacket from the restaurant's bill. Send it to my office." With that, he rose, threw his napkin onto the table, and walked out his 2 associates, trailing in his wake like pilot fish. The silence he left behind was heavier than the one he had created. Everyone stared at Summer. Some with pity, some with admiration, but most with the uncomfortable look of people who were glad it wasn't them. Mr. Dubois turned on her, his face pale and his hands shaking with rage. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice trembling. "Do you know who that was? He could buy this building and have it torn down out of spite. You are finished here. Pack your things. Get out." Summer looked past him to the corner where Leo was being comforted by another waiter. She had lost her job. She had jeopardized her brother's medical care. A wave of panic washed over her. But as she saw the look of profound, tearful gratitude on Leo's face, the panic subsided, replaced again by that cold resolve. She hadn't just stood up for Leo. She had stood up for Dr. Schmidt. She had stood up for every person Landon Carter had ever stepped on. As she walked to the staff locker room, her career at Ethelgard's in ruins, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He had wanted to make a lesson of Leo, but he had made a far more dangerous enemy out of her. He thought he had fired a waitress. He had no idea he had just armed a witness. The 2 days following her dismissal from Ethelgard's were a blur of anxiety and grim determination. The panic was real and visceral. Every time she looked at the calendar on her kitchen wall, a red circle around the date her brother's next medical bill was due. A knot of ice formed in her stomach. She fired off resumes to every upscale restaurant in the city, but the story of what happened at Ethelgard's traveled fast in the close-knit world of fine dining. No one wanted to hire the waitress who had stood up to Landon Carter. She was radioactive. The fear was a constant companion, but it was the anger that truly fueled her. It was a clean, sharp anger that burned away the fog of despair. Carter hadn't just taken her job. He had tried to take her dignity, just as he had taken Leo's, just as he had taken Dr. Schmidt's life's work. He operated from a fortress of wealth, convinced of his own invulnerability. Summer decided it was time to test the foundations of that fortress. She spent those 2 days not just looking for a new job, but preparing for war. Her small apartment, usually cluttered with law textbooks, transformed into an investigative hub. She resurrected her old journalism project on Carter and Innovatech diagnostics. She pulled out boxes of notes, interview transcripts, and financial documents she had painstakingly gathered 2 years prior. The story was all there, a trail of breadcrumbs leading from Carter's hostile bid to the manufactured patent lawsuit, to the crushing legal fees that had bled Dr. Schmidt dry. She had the what, the when, and the how. What she had always lacked was the platform, the why anyone should care. Then she found it. An article from a glossy business journal published just last week. It was a fawning profile of Landon Carter, painting him as a visionary philanthropist. The centerpiece of the article was the announcement of the upcoming Carter Foundation Gala for Children's Health, a lavish, exclusive event where he would be presenting a record-breaking donation of $10 million to the city's largest pediatric hospital. The gala was to be held in a private, booked-out event. The venue, Ethelgard's. The hypocrisy was so staggering, so profoundly cynical, that Summer actually laughed out loud. It was a bitter, humorless sound. Landon Carter, the man who had buried a medical innovation that could have saved countless lives, was now going to be celebrated as a champion of health. He would stand on a stage bathed in applause, preening about his generosity, while Dr. Schmidt's revolutionary diagnostic tool gathered dust in a patent vault. That was the crack in his fortress, his public image, his carefully curated reputation as a benefactor. That was what he valued above all else, the gilded armor that protected his rotten core. And Summer knew she had the one weapon that could pierce it the truth. A plan began to form, audacious and terrifyingly simple. She couldn't fight him in a courtroom or a boardroom, but she could fight him in the court of public opinion. She had to get into that gala. Her first call was to Leo. She found his number through a former co-worker and met him at a small coffee shop far from the city centre. He looked better, the haunted look in his eyes replaced by a quiet defiance. He told her he'd found a new job at a family-owned Italian place. "They heard what you did," Leo said, his gratitude palpable. "My new boss said he'd rather have staff with a backbone than customers with a bad heart." He pushed an envelope across the table. Inside was a wad of cash. "It's a few hundred, my first paycheck. I wanted you to have it, for standing up for me." Summer pushed it back. "Keep it, Leo. But there is something you can do for me." She explained her plan. She needed a way in, a staff uniform, a schedule, the layout of the event. Leo, who was still in touch with friends on the Ethelgard staff, was her inside man. He was hesitant, at first terrified of the risk, but the memory of his humiliation at Carter's hands was a powerful motivator. He agreed. Her second step was research. She spent an entire day and half the night online, cross-referencing the guest list for the gala, which had been partially leaked on a society blog. She wasn't just looking for names. She was looking for journalists. She found him, David Chen, an investigative reporter for a respected online publication known for its long-form, deeply researched takedowns of corporate malfeasance. He was tenacious and had a reputation for being unafraid of powerful figures. According to the blog, he had scored a coveted invitation. He would be her intended audience. The final piece was the message itself. It couldn't be a hysterical outburst. It had to be cold, factual, and undeniable. She meticulously crafted a series of questions on a set of index cards. Each one was a surgical strike designed to unravel Carter's narrative of philanthropy. "Mr. Carter, as you make this generous donation, can you comment on the status of the patents acquired from the bankruptcy of Innovatech Diagnostics in 2023? Is it true that Innovatech's primary asset was a non-invasive diagnostic tool for early-stage pancreatic cancer, developed by the late Dr. Owen Schmidt? Can you explain to the hospital you're donating to why this life-saving technology has remained undeveloped and dormant under your company's ownership? Is your reputation as a philanthropist more valuable than the lives this technology could have saved? She rehearsed them over and over, her voice steady, stripping them of all emotion until they were nothing but sharp-pointed facts. The night before the gala, Leo met her in a darkened alley behind her apartment building. He handed her a bundled Ethelgard's uniform and a staff ID with a faded picture of a former employee. "The gala starts at 7. He whispered, his breath pluming in the cool night air. "The press is set to arrive at 8 for his speech. He's scheduled to speak at 8:30, right after the main course is cleared. That's your window. The whole staff will be on edge. Dubois will be glued to Carter's side. You should be able to slip in with the team clearing the plates." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of fear and awe. "Are you sure about this, Summer? He's not a man you cross." Summer clutched the uniform to her chest. It felt like a soldier's armor. She thought of her brother, of the mounting bills, of the terrifying uncertainty of her future. Then she thought of Dr. Schmidt's defeated eyes and Carter's cruel smirk. "Some people don't give you a choice," she said, her voice firm. They cross every line, and one day someone has to cross back. As she walked back to her apartment, the weight of what she was about to do settled upon her. This was no longer just about a job or an insult. It was a reckoning. She was a single, unemployed waitress about to walk into a den of lions with nothing but a uniform and the truth. It was insane. It was impossible. And it was the only thing she could do. The back entrance of Ethelgard's was a world away from the opulent facade. It was a chaotic symphony of clattering dishes, shouted orders, and the humid, greasy air of the kitchens. Dressed in the familiar black uniform, her hair pulled back tightly under a net. Summer slipped through the door with a surge of adrenaline that made her feel both hyper-aware and strangely detached, as if she were watching herself in a movie. No one gave her a second glance. The gala had stretched the restaurant staff to its breaking point. Extra hands were bussing tables and running dishes, their faces tight with stress. Summer was just another anonymous cog in the machine, and she used that anonymity to her advantage. She grabbed a tray, kept her head down, and blended in. The dining room was breathtaking. It had been transformed. The tables were adorned with towering floral centerpieces and arrangements of flickering candles that cast a warm golden glow on the faces of the city's elite. The air hummed with power, the murmur of conversations about stock prices, political appointments, and summering in the Hamptons. These were the gods feasting on Olympus, and Summer was the ghost who had slipped past the gates. She moved along the periphery, her eyes scanning the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saw Mr. Dubois, his face plastered with a sycophantic smile, hovering near the head table. And there at the center of it all was Landon Carter. He was in his element, exuding a regal charm that was utterly at odds with the petty tyrant she knew. He laughed, he accepted handshakes and backpats, he played the part of the benevolent patriarch to perfection. Seated at his table were the mayor, the hospital's chief administrator, and several other city luminaries. And just a few tables away, nursing a glass of sparkling water and observing everything with a hawk's intensity, was the reporter David Chen. She recognized him from his author photo. He was exactly where she needed him to be. The main course was served a symphony of perfectly executed service. Summer busied herself, clearing empty glasses and bread plates, her movements crisp and efficient. Her proximity to the power in the room was dizzying. She heard snippets of conversation, a senator complaining about a new tax bill, a tech CEO boasting about a recent acquisition. It was a bubble, a world hermetically sealed from the consequences of its own actions. As the main course plates were cleared, a palpable sense of anticipation began to build. The lights dimmed slightly. Mr. Dubois scurried to a small lectern set up near the head table and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention," he began, his voice amplified throughout the room. "It is my profound honor to welcome you to this truly special evening. An evening to celebrate not just generosity, but vision. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce a man whose contributions to our city are immeasurable, the chairman of the Carter Foundation, Mr. Landon Carter." A wave of polite, enthusiastic applause filled the room. This was it. The window Leo had told her about. Carter rose from his seat and strode to the lectern, basking in the applause. He held up his hands, a gesture of humble magnanimity that made Summer's stomach turn. He arranged his notes, took a sip of water, and smiled out at the adoring crowd. Summer's hands were slick with sweat. Her breath hitched in her throat. Every rational thought told her to stop, to turn around, to melt back into the shadows of the kitchen and disappear. This was madness. She would be arrested, disgraced her life, ruined beyond repair. Then she saw David Chen. The reporter wasn't applauding. He was watching Carter with a professional, skeptical detachment, his pen poised over his notebook. He was waiting for the story. Summer thought of Dr. Schmidt, He didn't just take my company. He took the years. Her fear receded, replaced by a crystalline calm. She set her tray down on a nearby service stand. She smoothed the front of her uniform. One step, then another. She began to walk from the edge of the room towards the center, her path on a direct collision course with the lectern. She moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose that initially went unnoticed. She was just a waitress part of the scenery. A few heads turned, their expressions mildly curious. Mr. Dubois, standing beside the lectern, saw her first. A look of confusion crossed his face, quickly followed by dawning horror as he realized who she was and what she was about to do. He took a half step forward, his mouth opening to intercept her. But he was too late. Summer stopped directly in front of the lectern, a few feet from Landon Carter. She was positioned perfectly between him and the majority of his audience, a servant who had forgotten her place. The room, which had been settling into an expectant hush for the speech, fell into a deeper, more profound silence of pure confusion. Carter stared down at her, his benevolent smile freezing on his face. The shift in his eyes was instantaneous. The mask of the philanthropist fell away, revealing the cold, furious predator beneath. "What is the meaning of this?" He hissed, his voice, a low growl that the microphone barely picked up. "Security." But Summer spoke before anyone could react, her voice not loud but clear and steady, imbued with an authority that commanded attention. She wasn't shouting. She was asking a question. "Mr. Carter," she began, her eyes locked on his. "My name is Summer Duffy. Before you begin your speech on your commitment to children's health, I have a question for the esteemed members of the press here tonight, and for you." She had them. Every eye in the room was on her. David Chen's pen was flying across his notepad. Phones previously hidden were slowly being raised. She had captured the eye of the storm. Now all she had to do was unleash the tempest. Landon Carter's face was a granite mask of fury. The carefully constructed artifice of the evening, his grand moment of public adoration, had been hijacked by a waitress. For a moment, he seemed to swell with a rage so potent it felt like it could shatter the crystal glasses on the tables. "Get her out of here," he snarled at Dubois, his voice low and dangerous. Dubois and two burly security guards started to move in, but Summer held her ground. She hadn't come this far to be dragged away in silence. "My question is for Mr. Carter, the philanthropist." She said, her voice rising just enough to carry through the stunned room, directly addressing the sea of confused and intrigued faces. "I'm sure the administrator of the pediatric hospital will be grateful for your $10 million donation. But I wonder if that money is a donation or if it's an indulgence, a payment for a guilty conscience." A wave of scandalized murmurs swept through the audience. This was no longer just an interruption. It was an accusation. David Chen was on his feet now, his phone out recording. Carter's eyes were blazing. "This is libel. This is a pathetic cry for attention from a disgruntled former employee." "I am a former employee. That's true." Summer shot back, her voice ringing with conviction. "You had me fired for defending a young waiter you were bullying. But that's not why I'm here." She took a breath, holding the index card in her mind's eye. "I'm here to talk about Innovatech Diagnostics." The name hung in the air. It meant nothing to the glittering audience, but to Carter, it was a spectre at the feast. Summer saw it in the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something that looked like alarm in his cold eyes. "I'm here to talk about Dr. Owen Schmidt." Summer continued pressing her advantage. A brilliant man who developed a non-invasive diagnostic tool that could detect early-stage pancreatic cancer, a technology that could have saved thousands of lives, perhaps the lives of some of the very children your foundation claims to champion. She turned her gaze from Carter to the hospital administrator at the head table, whose face had gone pale. Mr. Carter's company, Carter Global Acquisitions, bought Dr. Schmidt's company out of a bankruptcy Mr. Carter himself engineered through predatory litigation. He acquired the patents for that life-saving technology for pennies on the dollar. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The room was utterly silent now, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. "So my first question is this," Summer said, her voice a surgeon's scalpel. "Mr. Carter, can you tell us why, for the 2 years since you acquired it, that revolutionary, life-saving medical technology has been buried? Why has it remained undeveloped, sitting dormant in your company's patent portfolio, while people continue to receive late-stage death sentences?" Carter's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd. Patent development is complex. There are market considerations, further research needed. Or is it because the technology was never profitable enough for you?" Summer cut through his blustering defense. "Dr. Schmidt's vision was for it to be affordable, accessible. That doesn't align with your business model of maximizing shareholder value at all costs, does it? Is it possible that it was worth more to you as a tax write-off, a dead asset, than as a tool that could save human lives?" The security guards were beside her now, their hands on her arms. But Summer wasn't finished. She twisted to face the audience, to face David Chen's recording phone. "My final question is for everyone here tonight, celebrating this man's generosity," she declared, her voice filled with all the righteous fury she had suppressed for 2 years. What is the true measure of a man's charity? Is it the check he writes in the spotlight for good publicity? Or is it the lives he quietly condemns to death in the shadows for a good balance sheet? You are applauding a man who is donating $10 million to a hospital, while he sits on a technology that could be worth billions in the currency that truly matters, the currency of saved lives. "Enough," Carter roared, his voice finally exploding the microphone, picking up the raw, unrestrained fury of a king whose crown had been knocked from his head. The polished veneer of the philanthropist was gone, replaced by the ugly, snarling face of the bully she knew so well. "Get this nobody out of my sight." The guards began to pull her away, their grip firm. Summer didn't struggle. Her work was done. As they hauled her through the stunned crowd, past the tables of the rich and powerful, who were now staring at Landon Carter with new, questioning eyes, she locked gazes one last time with David Chen. The reporter gave her a barely perceptible nod, a look of profound respect and journalistic hunger. They dragged her through the swinging doors of the kitchen, where the staff stared at her, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. Mr. Dubois was right behind them, his face purple with rage. "You're finished, Duffy," he sputtered. "I'll see to it you never work in this city again. I'm calling the police. You'll be charged with trespassing, defamation." Summer simply looked at him, her breathing heavy but her spirit soaring. She felt a strange sense of peace. She had walked into the heart of the beast's lair and spoken the truth. She had lost her job, her security, and likely her freedom for the night. But as they pushed her out the back door into the cold night air, she knew she had taken something far more valuable from Landon Carter, his carefully crafted lie. The unraveling had begun. The immediate aftermath was as brutal as she had expected. Summer spent 6 hours in a cold, sterile police station answering questions about trespassing and public disturbance. Landon Carter, through his lawyers, had pressed charges. The accusation was that a mentally unstable, vengeful ex-employee had staged a delusional attack. Summer, exhausted, but resolute, told her side of the story calmly and factually to a detective who seemed more bored than convinced. She was released just before dawn on her own recognizance, walking out into the grey pre-dawn chill of the city, with nothing but her purse and a court summons. Her phone, which had been in a locker, was a firestorm. Hundreds of notifications, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, and a text from Leo that just said, "Are you okay? You were incredible." But it was the top search result for Landon Carter that made her stop dead on the sidewalk. It was an article from David Chen published just an hour after the incident. The headline was explosive: "Philanthropist or Predator? Waitress derails Carter Foundation Gala with accusations of buried life-saving medtech." The article was a masterwork of journalistic precision. It detailed the entire confrontation, quoting Summers' questions verbatim. Crucially, it didn't just report her accusations, it began the work of verifying them. Chen had already dug up the public records of Carter Global's acquisition of Innovatech Diagnostics from the bankruptcy court. He had found an old university press release about Dr. Owen Schmidt's promising research. The story wasn't just "Waitress yells at billionaire." It was "Reporter investigates credible claims." The article ended with a chilling sentence. Landon Carter's foundation donated $10 million to save children last night, but the questions raised by Summer Duffy suggest he may be withholding a cure worth infinitely more. We will be investigating this further. The story went viral. By noon, it was the #1 trending topic on social media. Dr. Carter Gala and Irto Dohojo Summer Duffy were everywhere. The initial narrative pushed by Carter's PR team that she was an unhinged stalker was quickly being eroded by the facts Chen presented. Her single act of defiance had become a spark, and David Chen had thrown gasoline on it. The consequences for Carter were swift and devastating. The hospital, under immense public pressure, announced it was reviewing the ethical implications of the donation. Several high-profile board members of the Carter Foundation resigned, citing a need for transparency. The stock price of Carter Global Acquisitions dipped, then slid as investors grew nervous. The fortress was crumbling. Summer became a reluctant public figure. Her photo was everywhere. She was hounded by reporters. Some outlets painted her as a hero, a modern-day David against Goliath. Others, fueled by Carter's aggressive legal team, portrayed her as an opportunistic fraud. She ignored them all, hiding out in her apartment, the anxiety about her brother's medical bills now a raging fire. She had won the moral victory, but the practical realities of her life were closing in. A week later, a thick envelope arrived. It wasn't another legal threat. It was from a top-tier law firm that specialized in whistleblower cases. Inside a letter explained that a consortium of former Innovatech employees, emboldened by her actions, had come forward. They had documentation lab results and internal memos that proved the efficacy of Dr. Schmidt's device and corroborated the story of Carter's predatory tactics. They wanted to launch a class action lawsuit against Carter Global for wrongful suppression of a viable medical technology, and they wanted Summer to be the public face of their case. The firm would represent them all pro bono. The same day, she received an email from David Chen. His follow-up investigation had uncovered a pattern. He had found 2 other small tech companies in different sectors that Carter had crushed using the exact same litigate and acquire strategy. The story was now much bigger than just Dr. Schmidt. It was about a systemic, predatory business practice. He offered her a job, not as a waitress, but as a junior researcher on his investigative team. "You don't just have a backbone," he wrote. "You have an instinct for the truth. That's rarer and more valuable than any journalism degree." Standing in her small apartment, holding the job offer in one hand and the legal letter in the other, Summer felt a profound shift. The fear was finally gone, replaced by a sense of purpose that felt like sunlight after a long, dark night. She had spoken up, not knowing if anyone would listen, and the world had answered. She wouldn't get rich. The legal battle against Landon Carter would be long and arduous, a war of attrition. But it was a war she was no longer fighting alone. She looked at the picture of her smiling brother on the mantelpiece and knew that her future, once so uncertain, was now clear. She would not be serving the powerful in silence anymore. She would be holding them to account, one buried truth at a time. Her voice, once a whisper in a gilded cage, had become an echo that was shaking the foundations of an empire. The story of Summer Duffy isn't just about a waitress and a billionaire. It's a powerful reminder that one voice speaking the truth with courage can be louder than all the money in the world. It shows us that true strength isn't about the power you hold over others, but the principles you refuse to sacrifice, even when you have nothing left to lose. Summer's story didn't end when she was escorted out of the restaurant. It began. She ignited a movement that proves that integrity is not for sale, and that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, is above being held accountable for their actions. If her courage moved you, and you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to help this story reach more people. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thank you for listening.